And good afternoon, everybody. I am Chief Meteorologist Casanova Nurse with WTXL in Tallahassee, Florida. The First Alert Weather Team continuing to monitor the progress and developments of Hurricane Dorian in the Atlantic, beginning to move directly over the Abaco Islands, Great Abaco, over the last several hours. And it's been slowing down its pace. It's been starting to really lash out at some of the other islands of the northwestern Bahamas. It has been making that progress through those regions, just a couple hundred miles off the Florida East Coast all day long. And this is going to be a storm of extraordinary proportions, especially when it comes to its strength and wind and its effects it will have on land masses that it will encounter. And the most immediate area of its fury has been in sections of the northwestern Bahamas. So this is the high-resolution visible satellite imagery of the circulation of the storm. And of course, as we advance into the next couple of hours, we'll start to get less daylight, lower sun angles, so maybe a little more detail to see in that cloud structure. And you know, with the overall hurricane icon, the way it is, with the little band coming into the circle and then the one coming in from the bottom, well, that's kind of like how these clouds, even around the central core, are beginning to be shaped, wrapping themselves in around a very intense low. We've had two landfall points already with this system on various points of Great Abaco, including one point near Marsh Harbor. And if you've seen some social media posts or maybe some national news coverage which has shared some of those Twitter videos and whatnot, you will have seen some of the flooding that's been occurring, the strong winds. Some folks were able to get out even in the eye, the calmer part of the storm, before the very intense winds came back out once again. So the video is out there, and we're starting to see evidence of some of that immense devastation, or at least immense strength of the storm, and what's likely to be some devastating images that will be coming in short order as far as what's been happening out there in the northwestern islands of the Bahamas. But here's the forecast as it stands now. Adjusting your visibility there for a bit. Peak winds right now 185 miles per hour. That's tied with several other hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin on record since the 1850s, if I'm not mistaken, for the second strongest hurricane based off of wind. Not necessarily taking in the pressure, but just for informational purposes, the lowest central pressure is 26.88 inches, or if you're more familiar with millibars, that's 910 millibars. So that's extremely deep low pressure, a very intense hurricane, peak winds 185, hurricane force winds. They do extend out, once I get that information from the notes, about 45 miles. So that entire cloud deck does not carry 185 mile per hour winds. It's in a very tight area right around the eye wall, and then hurricane force winds of at least 74 miles per hour spread out 45 miles. So if you put that on top of those islands, essentially the whole island is getting a continued lashing of these hurricane force winds, and sometimes even those peak winds from time to time. So the forecast track essentially has not changed a whole lot. There's still the expectation for Dorian to make that northerly turn. It is slowing down, by the way, moving west at 5. 24 hours ago, it was moving at 10 miles per hour. A couple of days ago, it was more like 15 miles per hour in movement. So it is slowing down, and that evidence of a slow crawl is now coming into plain view. So the slower it goes, the more devastation, the more duration of those stronger winds, the heavy rain across the northwestern Bahamas. And perhaps, if it continues to slow down in its westward movement, eventually it'll slow down enough to where it finds that weakness in the atmosphere to the north of it, and it'll start turning to the north. That could be good for the east coast of Florida, and it's definitely going to favor our local weather, because it'll keep the core of that system a little farther offshore, especially in relation to us, and that will really minimize any kind of impacts that we could have otherwise received, especially when you go back to Wednesday, Thursday, when there were multiple scenarios we were considering. Some of those worst case scenarios, in fact, many of those worst case scenarios are almost completely off the table for us. So it's a lot more confident that the storm itself is going to stay to the east of our region, the core of it that is. But keep in mind that tropical storm force winds, they spread out about 140 miles from the center, and that last check, that's still the current expansion of the hurricane or the tropical storm force winds out 140 miles from the center. So if there's even a little slight 20 or 30 mile jog from where this icon is, and if maybe it goes into this more left side of the cone, just throwing this out there because it is within the realm of possibility, that could maybe bring some tropical storm force winds closer to our Swanee River Valley counties. And for several days I've been saying that if there is any place that gets a little more exposure to this, it would be the Swanee River area based on what we've seen the last couple days. And that's still the case, but I do stress it is a low case, a low chance that we will have any kind of lengthy duration of tropical storm force winds. With the confidence in the modeling, I'm a little more confident in saying that most areas will escape without any major impacts, but you'll notice a decent north breeze at times, especially if you're in our eastern areas, or if, again, by chance, the center of the hurricane comes a little more close to that line as compared to where it is right there. We do have to account for the spread of that cone, in which the center of the hurricane can go anywhere within that cone. That just accounts for the natural margin of error that we can get. But again, the trends, I'm all about the trends, and the trends have been solid in paralleling the East Coast, maybe just staying a little ways offshore. It's not 100% guaranteed it will do that, but at least the evidence supports that to occur, and that would in turn minimize any impacts here. Beyond this point, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it starts to move a little more rapidly over to the northeasterly direction, maybe skimming the Outer Banks, the mid-Atlantic region, and then eventually farther out into the North Atlantic. So again, the 5-category Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale, Category 5 is the highest you can go, and that's where Dorian is, with the latest peak wind speeds being detected at 185 miles per hour. Only Hurricane Allen in 1980 topped that speed. It had a 190 mile per hour peak wind speed. So this one is not far off from being the strongest in the Atlantic Basin based off of wind speed. So this is definitely one of those that will rank right up there with Andrew and Camille, Michael from last year. Michael's peak winds were 160 in post-storm analysis. Dorian is above that. So this storm is even stronger than Michael was, if you can believe a storm can get any stronger than Michael was. But this is what Dorian is. But however, it is more of an impact for the east coast of Florida and not an impact for the Big Bend coast. So that is one thing we here in North Florida, South Georgia can be thankful for, that this is not aiming straight for us. Just as we pop this up, there's been some revisions in some of the spread of hurricane watches and warnings. So this graphic has just now, in the last few seconds, become outdated because hurricane warnings apparently have been hoisted for sections of the Florida East Coast, essentially in this red shade here where it says Hurricane Watch. That Hurricane Watch in purple text, that's now been pushed up a little ways to the north, and it's been issued for areas in essentially Volusia County. So the coastline of Volusia County, including Daytona Beach, in a hurricane watch. This red shade is a hurricane warning. It stretches from Jupiter Inlet on its southern extent to the north to the Volusia-Brevard County line. So now that means Cape Canaveral, Port Canaveral, Cocoa Beach, Vero, Fort Pierce, that entire region now with a hurricane warning, meaning hurricane conditions are expected to occur within that zone within the next 36 hours. We also have a series of storm surge warnings and watches for those eastern zones. Storm surge warning from Lantana to the Volusia-Brevard line. A storm surge watch from north of Deerfield Beach to Lantana. And then from Volusia-Brevard County to Volusia-Flagler County line. So those are storm surge watches and warnings, and we'll have a different graphic for that to display later on tonight. Tropical storm warnings continuing for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet, so that would be this zone here. That's where a tropical storm warning is combined with a hurricane watch, if I'm not mistaken. That's exactly what the notes say. And then a tropical storm watch continues from north of Golden Beach to Deerfield Beach, which is this zone here, and then Lake Okeechobee. So just as we were starting this stream, those were updated on the graphics. So there's an expansion of those tropical storm advisories, but the point being for us is that we do not have any hurricane or tropical storm related watches or warnings for our local counties. We are still out of that zone, and nothing has been issued in that regard for our region. That our region, of course, being the Big Bend, North Florida, South Georgia, near the state line. So I mentioned earlier that the overall worst case scenario has basically been taken off the table for our area. There's a lot of confidence that we will continue to see this system more on an east path from where it is right now, and then eventually beginning its turn to the north like that. And again, whether it's right where that purple arrow is, or maybe just a little bit closer, that will determine whether we stay with a low impact across our area with maybe some eastern rain in the Swanee Valley, maybe some passing, maybe one squall or two, maybe a little breeze, or a more noticeable impact if it were to cross over the Florida East Coast. Again, that's continuing to be a lower possibility compared to the offshore possibility. It's not impossible to see that occur, but again, all the agreements in the forecast data, the computer data, the trends have all kept the center offshore. But especially if you happen to be watching from the Atlantic coast, a difference of maybe 50 miles offshore versus 20 miles offshore will make a huge difference for the immediate Atlantic coast in terms of what kind of strength and effects you can get. If it's a much closer approach, you will get much more hazardous weather coming in your direction along the immediate Atlantic coast. If you're watching within our area in the I-75 corridor, basically the more east you are of I-75, the more possible you can have some of these effects in your region. But again, only a select portion of our region is east of I-75. So again, if you're a local here in the Big Bend, southwest Georgia, south central Georgia, you know the reference point of I-75. If you're east of there, maybe a little bit of a higher chance, and the overall probabilities for tropical storm gusts to be experienced are still fairly low. But again, it's a west-east split. And again, this is not saying if you have a 10% chance, you're definitely going to get tropical storm force winds. That's not what that means at all. It's just if you're closer to where the storm is, the storm center, you will have a correspondingly higher chance. So our eastern areas, maybe about 40-50% chance. It doesn't mean you're definitely going to get that for a lengthy duration. But maybe if one of those outer bands just travels far enough and that rain coming with that breeze, you may get one of those brief squall periods. So here's how it looks in the forecast and focus. We're going through time. The showers that we have out there right now, in some cases, they're not connected directly to Dorian. But the influence of the northeast wind pattern is somewhat of an effect that Dorian is producing on our regional section of the atmosphere. So tomorrow, yes, there will be some times of moisture, passing rain. These are not true feeder bands from the hurricane, but the moisture that flows from the Atlantic across our region will be capable of carrying some passing showers and storms. Now here's how it looks Tuesday as we start to get in on where the storm may have a closer impact to the Atlantic shore. It does produce at least a very thin line of scattered rain across our eastern areas, and you might notice the blue lines indicating the wind flow coming from the northeast, and that would be wind speeds about 10 to 15 miles per hour. Nothing major for our area based on some of the short-term data that's now coming into the view of our weather computer system, and it has a little higher level of reliability. I'm not sure if I can expand this view, but I guess I can. This is how it looks as far as the forecast and focus data for Tuesday, 4 p.m., and it keeps the center of the hurricane off the coast of Palm Beach, off of Stewart, and off of Vero Beach. But nonetheless, this is where a lot of those feeder bands will be experienced, and this is where the highest wind speeds will likely be based on this particular model. And again, I feel a little more confident in showing this sort of graphic because we're just 2 days out from this time span as opposed to last Wednesday when we were 7 days out, and you show a model graphic like this and it has a higher rate of error possibility. So this one is a little more high confidence, and it does keep it offshore based on this run of the forecast and focus data. But again, for the local effects, it's still pretty distant. It's likely to be slowly moving, and I'm going to try to rewind it. Actually, that's not going to work in this mode, but let's see if this will work. I'm sorry for going in reverse with the day, with the time frame on this, but here's the Monday 6 p.m. Positioning, which still has it hovering very close to Grand Bahama Island. So even 24 hours from now, the projections for this to continue to hammer the northwestern Bahamas, and that's on top of maybe about 12 hours that's already passed when we have hurricane effects there. That's going to be a rough go for areas like in Freeport, that's on Grand Bahama Island. That's going to be a very serious situation. But again, Going forward in time, Monday into Tuesday, since I can alter the graphics like this, it does show very slow movement and a gradual northerly drift. So I think that's going to be something tomorrow and into Tuesday morning, exactly when that north turn happens, at what rate, and how close it can get to the east coast of Florida before it starts to turn elsewhere. So here's our local focus, and again, this graphic is designed for our broadcast use, so some of the text is blocked by my camera view here, but we'll go through it step by step. This is western area, so we'll say Tallahassee, Thomasville, Moultrie points to the west, and that's just a rough boundary that I just throw out there just to give you a reference point. Whatever effects that we get, and again, I do not suspect we'll have anything big. But we will have a period of time, especially Tuesday, Wednesday through early Thursday, of mostly north or northeast winds. I think the highest we'll see sustained is 5 to 15 miles per hour. We've had summertime thunderstorms that produce more wind gusts than what I expect this to put out for our area, especially in the western, we'll say western 2/3 of our zones on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Few minor gusts, that's about it. Down here it says passing clouds, stray rain, then drier and hotter. That's what that's saying with that graphic as possible impacts. Again, we've had summertime thunderstorms that will be worse than what I expect to have, and that kind of malfunction there. But it's not worse than the pulse thunderstorms that we get sometimes that produce some very strong outflowing winds. So again, I don't want to say it's not a big deal, but in some cases for areas in the tri-state, this will not be a big deal. Lake Seminole and the Apalachicola River, this will not be a big issue going into this week. But how does the eastern sections fare from this? Along I-75. I'm going to use I-75 as a split because, again, if you're near or west of I-75, same time frame applies here, late Tuesday through early Thursday. Perhaps if you're near I-75, about 5 to 20 mile per hour winds. Yeah, you'll notice the breeze out there, but it's nothing that we can't handle. And then if you are east of I-75, you can get stronger gusts. Again, it all depends on how close the eye gets to the first coast area. If it straddles the first coast, that could perhaps spread some tropical storm force winds over towards the Osceola Forest. And again, that's considering the 140-mile maximum spread of tropical storm force winds from the center of the hurricane. So theoretically, that could reach the I-75 corridor, and I will account for that possibility in the wording here. Stronger gusts just east of I-75. And here in the possible impacts, it says passing clouds and rain, few squalls, then drier and hotter. So basically the same thing that the western sections of our region can get, with the exception of we'll throw in the possibility that maybe as the storm gets at its closest approach to Jacksonville, some of those feeder bands can lash out in areas like Bradford County and Union County, and then to the east in Columbia County. But maybe 1 or 2 at most from current projections. That's all that I would expect. And then on the backside of the system, as it starts to move out, excuse me, we'll probably have a very dry and hot period as our winds will come from the northwest and west. So that's going to really reduce any kind of rain chance and probably promote additional heat for Thursday and Friday, maybe even into next weekend. So if you are still concerned about whether we could get some impacts, or you want to track the hurricane, see the forecast track for yourself, all that data is available on our Storm Shield app. And if by chance we do have some issuance of a local tropical storm watch by chance, you'll get that notification as soon as that advisory is issued, if it is issued. But I don't really believe we'll have a huge impact from that based on the current situation and the current forecast. There's always the chance that this could maybe continue to move to the west a little closer, and if that were to occur, that could maybe spread some of the impacts closer to our area. But right now it's not looking like it's going to be a substantial move. However, it's important to keep in mind we're still 2 days out from this, 2.5 days, and things can change in that time frame. All right, I did a lot of talking there, and one thing I would like to do is at least address some of the comments that you've had, and I hope it's not necessarily information overload over the last several days, but it's just part of our efforts since a lot of folks have had questions about this system, its impacts on our area. We want to make sure we're doing what we are needing to do to make sure folks are informed. So if you do still have some questions, I'll scroll through some of these and give you an idea or give you some responses to some of the questions you may have. And I appreciate those who have been able to tune in. I see maybe some folks, I assume it means that some of you are watching from where Hurricane Michael hit. And just to give you some reassurance that if you're watching from the Eastern Panhandle, the Emerald Coast, Gulf County, Bay County, this is not going to be a storm that just crosses over and moves up. I haven't seen any piece of reliable data since Friday that would show that. So this is not going to be another direct hit for Mexico Beach. I do not anticipate that happening. The forecast track doesn't show that either. So I hope that puts any sort of concern about that to ease, because the forecast map does not show that kind of solution being a possibility in our area. There's the forecast track. I have to adjust one of the settings here to get it to move up. Mexico Beach is right there. Let's get that pointer there. There's Mexico Beach. That's the positioning of the storm in relation to Mexico Beach. It's not coming to Mexico Beach, so or the Panhandle or any place that has been hammered by last year's hurricane. So we're looking good there in that regard, and hopefully folks will be able to rest easy with that. Randy is saying, Tamarin is saying, a few others are saying, is Tally in the clear? As I mentioned in the earlier graphic, and maybe I know some of these comments may have been here for a few minutes while I was speaking, I do think in Tallahassee we'll have a slight chance for a few passing showers. We may have winds around 5 to 15 miles per hour. I don't see a substantial impact from this as long as this track holds as it is. And I was in conversation with some other folks earlier today about, well, what if it jogs a little bit to the west? It would have to be a substantial jog to the west. It would have to be more of a jolt to the west. It would have to be on this left side of the cone for Tallahassee proper to really have any more noticeable impacts when it comes to wind and rain. And most everything is clustered right across the Atlantic coast. So I can say with reasonable confidence, based on the data over the weekend, that Tallahassee proper is not likely to get any kind of significant adverse weather from this. There could be times of passing rain. I do have a rain chance in my outlook for tomorrow. There could be maybe occasional breezes, but again, nothing too forceful when it comes to the wind flow from my perspective and my analysis. If you're in Live Oak, maybe when the storm gets its closest approach by Wednesday afternoon or so, yes, there could be at least a few more breezes, but like I said, maybe not more than a sustained wind of 20 and maybe just a brief gust above 30. That's how it looks right now. And of course, with any little shove farther to the west of this forecast track, that can modestly change a few things. But for now, it doesn't appear as if we're going to have a whole lot of major problems with this. And yeah, even if we do get rain within the capital city, it can be just a passing heavy downpour. It comes and goes, and it may kick up the winds just a little bit. But again, nothing more than what your average summertime thunderstorm could do. Scrolling down just a little bit more, yes, if you're in Jacksonville, and again, you do have sources of detailed information from Jacksonville. Our ABC affiliate there is First Coast News. Tim Deegan is the chief meteorologist there. If you find his page or that station's Facebook page, I'm sure they have a lot of information that's specific to Jacksonville. Same story if you're watching from Orlando or Palm Beach. I would suggest that you seek out the stations that are in your area. The ABC affiliate in Orlando is WFTV. We Scripps, who owns WTXL, has a station in West Palm Beach. It's WPTV. So go to those sources if you're looking for specific information outside of the Tallahassee, Thomasville, Valdosta viewing area. I strongly suggest you just do a quick search in Facebook, find their pages, and you can get a lot of detailed information for your specific area. But yes, if you're immediately along the East Coast, this storm will be much closer to you, and it only takes just a little jog of 20-30 miles from this current position to make a huge difference, and that's why hurricane warning was posted for that central portion of the east coast of Florida. So there's plenty of good reason for folks to continue to monitor these things, especially the closer you are to the Atlantic coast. Elise is asking, the cone of uncertainty doesn't necessarily forecast exactly where Dorian will go, and that is true. When will we have a better idea of what Dorian may do? Well, when it comes to, time is always something that works in our favor when we are closer to the event. And that goes for severe weather, hurricanes, blizzards, or anything like that. When you get closer to that time frame of when it's anticipated to occur, the model data is a lot more refined. There's real-time information that kind of goes into the modeling, and you can get more detailed outlooks, when you're closer to that time frame. So as with any hurricane, as we get closer to Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll have a better view as just for how narrow that cone will become, and whether or not there could be a little jog or jut to the right or the left of the current forecast to see exactly what kind of impacts can occur. This was the same situation with Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Irma. If you remember Irma, it was all about that right turn or that north turn. It was coming in, and then would it move like that? Would it move like that? Would it go up the spine? That was Hurricane Irma, and this is a very similar forecasting challenge for this. When does that north turn occur? And in this case, will it be over the coast? Will it be just off the coast, or maybe just inland? But most guidance suggests off the coast. But again, this is looking 48 hours from now, and the models can change somewhat. They have a pretty good latch on what the expectations are at this current time. But there is room for there is some jiggle room for this and wiggle room. So we do have to keep that in consideration. So I would not be safe or comfortable to say this will not move over the land of the East Coast, not quite at that comfort level. And that's what accounts for the cone of uncertainty, as it accounts for the natural margin of error that forecasts have at that point. All right, a few more comments and questions. Yes, someone mentioning that the storm's track has not changed much, at least in the last couple of days it hasn't changed. I'm just going to step off momentarily. If you're watching on our website or app stream, you won't notice a change in volume, but our Facebook viewers will notice a change in volume because the microphone for our Facebook feed is right here, whereas our web stream, my microphone's coming from my tie. But a couple more printouts just to make sure I'm on top of information. The microphone for Facebook may be sliding off, so you may hear a couple crackles. But nonetheless, maybe one thing you might be concerned about is rain. I don't have a rainfall graphic necessarily for this, but again, the closer you are to the center of the storm, the more rain is likely to fall. And the rain chances, again, are scattered for us, but I wouldn't even suspect we'd have any kind of significant flooding issues for our area just because of the passing nature of any rain that may come our way. So maybe an inch or two near the Atlantic coast. You have to be there to get maybe multiple inches, and maybe the heaviest rain will stay offshore if the system follows this current track. Okay, a few more, just scrolling through the many comments, and thank you so much for the remarks and comments and for the viewing that you have given so far. There is going to be an ongoing chance. I mentioned that it's already slowing down, now moving at 5 miles per hour, so that's less than the 10 miles per hour it was moving this time yesterday, so that slowdown is being projected. And in fact, you don't even really have to necessarily rely on the forecast information itself. If I had a drawing graphic, and in fact I do, this is a 6-hour loop, and I'm going to start it from when the loop begins and where the eye is positioned to now. It has moved about 35 miles in 6 hours. So if you do the quick math, that's about 6 miles each hour. It is slowing down. And that is a good thing. If it continues to slow down, well, it's good for us. I'll put it that way. It's not good for the folks in the northwestern Bahamas. But again, 12 hours ago, 24 hours ago, it was moving at a much faster rate. 15 miles per hour late last week, 10 miles per hour yesterday, now 5, 6 miles per hour. It is slowing down. So if we continue to see a slower movement in the next 12 to 24 hours, that could be a more positive sign that it could make a northerly turn a little sooner. But if it keeps going or even speeds up some at a consistent rate, not just, this hour it's moving at 6, next hour is moving at 8, and then it's back to 6 the hour later, if it's a more consistent trend of faster movement, then that does change things. But at least when it comes to current projections, it is already beginning to slow down, and that could mean that the upper level and mid-level steering currents are weaker, and it is going to find that weakness in the atmosphere to the north that will allow it to turn to the north. It's just a matter of time, but the slower it goes, the more likely it's going to catch that weakness and then turn and curve before it hits the coast. But again, I keep saying as a disclaimer, it's not guaranteed that this will happen the way I just described it, but it is a more likely possibility than other scenarios. Yeah, jiggle room, wiggle room, I don't have a script, and sometimes, sometimes the words come out in unintended ways, but nonetheless. All right. A couple more, and then I'm going to wrap things up because I do have a few more graphics to make, and hopefully we'll have more informative information to give you during our newscast coming up at 5 o'clock, or rather 5 o'clock in the evening, not 5 o'clock today. I believe it's a 6:30 newscast for today. Will a slowdown of Dorian make things significantly worse for us? Not really for us. It's making it worse for these folks here in the Bahamas because it's prolonging the peak winds, it's prolonging the heavy rain, it's making things miserable for them, and it's not moving out. Now, if it slows down, like I said just a minute or two ago, it could maybe catch that weakness to the north that allows it to turn to the north. So maybe slower is good for us, but if it keeps on moving to the west or even picks up speed, it may reach the east coast a little faster and then make a later turn to the north. But right now, that's a lesser chance compared to the slowdown that's currently underway with this system right now. Rob is asking, why is it slowing? The high pressure system to the north, which had been directing its westward movement, it's beginning to weaken, especially when it comes to the airflow in the upper and mid levels, which help to at least force the system to move one way or another. So we're getting a little weaker push, if you will, from the atmosphere to make it turn to the west. It's not quite as forceful as the high starts to weaken. So that's a sign that it's going to start slowing down. And then when this next little system comes in from the northwest, and just to get the camera's sake properly, a little upper trough comes in from the northwest, that will further weaken that high. And then that creates the weakness in the atmosphere for Dorian to move to the north. So it's a couple little things that have to happen for it to begin that northerly turn. But at least when it's why it's slowing down now is just the overall force of that of that mid-level high that's helping to push it to the west. It's not so forceful anymore. So the winds steering it are weaker, and that's why it's slowing down. Okay, Veronica is asking, is it going to go across South Florida? That's not what we're projecting right now based on the forecast track. And again, for more details specific to any geographical area outside of the Florida-Georgia line, I refer you to stations or other reliable media for your specific area. But the forecast track continues to keep more of a northerly turn, and nothing that shows it crossing completely over the peninsula. None of that is being foreseen. That's not in the official forecast, and it's not expected to happen for South Florida either. South Florida, yeah, you'll get some winds, and perhaps in Miami you'll get more of an opposite wind flow, which could certainly reduce any storm surge risk. But it still may be a little unpleasant at times, given your proximity to the center of the storm. So I see a lot of folks with the little prayers emoji and things like that. Whatever your inclination is, you can go ahead and keep doing it because at least nature is helping to keep a lot of the force away from our specific area, and of course those hard-hit areas from Hurricane Michael last year. This is not going to be an issue for the Panhandle or the Apalachicola River Basin, but this will be an issue for some folks, and it could ride up into the Carolinas as a weaker storm. Is this thing going to get stronger again? I think it's at its peak right now when it comes to strength. That'll probably be the last question I take on here. It's at its peak strength. You can't get much stronger than 185 mile per hour winds. Yes, there could be some room, but now that it's interacting with some land, as small as those islands are, that is land nonetheless. That is friction, and it's not going to do much in the way of triggering massive weakening. But nonetheless, it will perhaps cause some fluctuation in the structure of that core to where the circulation is not quite as robust and healthy as it was. I think it's just a minimal effect it could have. But to see it getting much stronger than it is now, there could be some adjustments based on Hurricane Hunter aircraft or ground level observations. We'll see the consistency of that data, if that has any impact on how the rate of speed of the winds of this system will be changed. But it is interacting with at least small portions of land, and that could make a difference in maybe dropping the speed just a little bit. We will definitely need to see what the next update comes out. And the position and speed updates come out every hour now that it's impacting the northwestern Bahamas. So there's an update coming every hour as far as the strength of this, the movement of this, and other effects that can be released on an hourly basis to keep folks updated. All right, that's all I've got for you right now. I encourage you to check in during our newscast We'll also have a streaming loop here running through the evening. We'll keep you advised as far as what's going on new with the system throughout the course of the night. This visible satellite loop is going to fade as we go past sunset, so we may not have the aid of this, but at least for now, just a clear-cut, well-formed eye is being seen, and whenever you see that in a hurricane like this, you know it's a powerful one and it's a troublesome one. But we'll continue to monitor trends, as I always like to do, and if there's anything dramatic or different, we'll push that information out. We'll keep you updated with regular updates through this evening, through tomorrow, and right up until this storm is no longer an issue for Florida or Georgia. I'm Chief Meteorologist Casanova Nurse. Thanks for joining me here on our various digital streams. We'll be back later on this evening, and the next time you'll see me is on our newscast starting approximately or right at 6:30. Thanks again for watching, and have a good evening.